As investment banking recruiting season kicks off, how are you supposed to keep track of dozens, sometimes hundreds of firms? It can be a lot of information to handle. Thankfully, our sponsor, WSO Academy, just announced something big for the summer. If you apply to the program and submit a first-round interview, you'll get free access for 1 year to their coveted high finance application tracker. You'll get this for free even if you don't join the program. Now, this is a limited time offer because it's usually only available to Academy students, but you can check it out now by joining the WSO Academy waitlist today with a link in the show notes, or go to wallstreetoasis.com/academy.
We know that deal pitches are important for investment banking interviews. So today I want to walk through an example of an actual deal pitch based on a deal that I see in the market right now. All right. Welcome to Investment Banking Insights. This is the only show dedicated to helping you learn both the technical and non-technical aspects of the investment banking process. Hi, my name is Alex Mason. I am your host, and I'm so grateful you're here. Now, last time on the show, we talked about deal pitches. We looked at the structure, and as a quick recap, number one, you want to make sure you have your basic facts right. And number two, you want to make sure you're providing some level of critical thought about the deal itself. So that's super high level, but I know for me, it helps to actually get examples to understand how to apply the knowledge. So let's go ahead and do that now. And this is a deal that is particularly interesting to me because I actually worked for the acquiring company at one point in my career. And so it's really interesting to see kind of how things have unfolded over time. But I want to talk to you about Boeing acquiring Spirit Aerosystems. Now, this is a big deal that's been in the news for some time now. And if you're recruiting for an industrials group, you definitely want to know this one. It should be an easy one to look up because of the size of the companies involved, and also the fact that it's just a pretty high profile deal in the industrial space. So Boeing is acquiring Spirit Aerosystems, and they are paying a lot of money for them. Specifically, they are buying the company for $4.7 billion, which equates to about $37.25 per share. The consideration of this transaction is an all-stock transaction, and the deal was announced July 1st, 2024, and I'm recording this episode here now in November 2024, and so the deal is going to be closing mid-2025 is what the expectation is. So why is this deal happening? Well, if you've been following the news over the past few years, you know that Boeing has been having some major safety issues. Back in 2018 and 2019, there were major plane crashes from Ethiopian Airlines and Lion Air related to the 737 MAX aircraft, and some problems with the software in that airplane at the time. And then also more recently, there was an issue on Alaska Airlines where there was a door plug missing, and a door actually opened during flight. It was very scary for the people on board, and so that was a Boeing plane as well. So Boeing has just been hit time and again with these safety issues in the past several years now, and they also have been facing some pressures related to their workers. So the workers, especially back in the headquarters up in Seattle, are almost all union. So they have been facing struggles with their unions in terms of disagreements over pay, benefits, those kinds of things. I do believe they finally did reach an agreement actually about a week before I'm recording this here, but nonetheless, it has cost the company so much money. And so when you combine the labor issues and the safety issues, one of the things that kind of spurred this deal was the feeling that they needed to reintegrate. So for a little bit of context, Boeing used to own Spirit Aerosystems and actually spun them out many years ago. Spirit Aerosystems is a current supplier to both Boeing and their major competitor, Airbus. And for many years, they've existed in their current form. But after this door plug incident with Alaska Airlines, some of those parts were traced back to actual manufacturing processes that happen at Spirit. And so there's a really big microscope now on both companies, Spirit and Boeing, in terms of how are you going to make sure these planes stay safe. Boeing is buying Spirit Aerosystems and becoming more vertically integrated and kind of bringing them back into the Boeing company like they used to be before. Now, one of the terms of this deal going through is that Spirit has to sell off some of its entities, particularly it owns some factories that currently produce parts for Airbus planes. Now, it wouldn't make sense for those factories to be under Boeing because Boeing and Airbus are competitors directly, so that's a conflict of interest. So Spirit has to sell those factories to Airbus. So Airbus is now part of this deal as well. And so assuming all of these contingencies happen by mid-2025, the deal will close. Now, there's some things that I want to highlight about this before getting into kind of a formal deal pitch. I'm really just giving you all the background information and the context for what's going on now. When you're looking at a deal pitch, one thing that I didn't mention in the last episode that I think is important to bring up now is that when you're talking about the acquirer, you want to highlight the stock price right before the deal was announced, and then see how that stock price has changed since deal announcement. Now, in Boeing's case, in July of 2024, the stock was trading at $182 per share right before this deal was announced. Now, 4 months later in November, it's trading lower. It's actually trading closer to $151 per share. So that just tells you that the market isn't that much more excited about Boeing just because they're doing this deal. Now, on the other hand, it's also useful to look at the stock price of the target company, both before and after the deal was announced. So with Spirit, their stock price right before the deal was $32.87. And then fast forward 4 months later to today, their stock price has basically stayed flat. It's currently at around $32.73, so not much of a change there. So what that says is that the market isn't necessarily that excited about Spirit's being acquired either, but it's not that pessimistic either. Whereas with Boeing, it just seems like things get more and more pessimistic every month or so in terms of how the stock is treated in the market. Now, one thing that you would want to highlight when talking about this deal in an interview, if you're giving a deal pitch, is definitely the consideration. So Boeing said that they are paying for Spirit Aerosystems completely in stock, 100% in stock. Now, this is really interesting because when I first found out about this, I thought, wait, that doesn't seem to make sense, especially because Boeing stock has been going down and down and down over time, over these last several years. It's not exactly an expensive currency to be using for a deal like this. And that's true if you study the 400 question guides or if you study the questions that I've talked about here on this show, you know that. But if you peel back the layers to get closer to reality for this particular situation, Boeing doesn't really have many more options that are better. The margins in the aerospace business, particularly for aircraft manufacturers, are actually not very high. Boeing has to make a profit, but their margins are not going to be the highest relative to other companies and other industries. So that being said, there's a lot of debt on Boeing's balance sheet and not a lot of cash. In particular, they've been burning a lot of cash recently because of all of the union strikes that have been going down. And so they don't have a lot of workers. And so there's a lot of money that gets spent literally just to keep the lights on at these facilities. So Boeing is in a tough financial spot. Also, their credit rating is actually BBB minus by S&P. And on the spectrum of credit ratings, BBB minus is like the lowest rung of what's considered investment grade. Companies that have investment grade credit ratings get the best terms on their debt if they want to issue debt. Companies that don't have investment grade ratings, they are considered like high yields or junk status, so they have to borrow at higher rates. Boeing isn't quite there yet. It's still technically investment grade, but they're going to have to pay a lot more for debt than other companies would, that are in a healthier financial position. It actually does make sense that Boeing is paying for this acquisition in stock as opposed to cash, because they don't have the cash on their balance sheet. And in order for them to borrow that cash, it would be very heavy interest payments for them in order to actually do that. In terms of strategic reasons that this deal makes sense, definitely helps from a regulatory standpoint. We talked about that. I think the competitive advantage that Boeing might be getting relative to, say, a company like Airbus, they're not really getting much of a competitive advantage here because Spirit is being split into a couple different pieces and Airbus is getting some of those pieces. So it's not like Boeing is acquiring like this intellectual property or assets that Airbus is not getting necessarily. So that's not really what is motivating the deal. It's more so preserving the long run capacity for Boeing to be a performing aerospace manufacturer going forward. So that's my personal opinion. So with all of that context and with all of those facts, I now want to kind of role play for you in a moment what I would say in an actual interview, because of course there's no way you're going to have 5-10 minutes to go into all that detail unless your interviewer asks you that. But it is important to have those facts in your mind and understand the logic and rationale so that you can be on your toes. So if you do get asked deeper questions, you have done the research and you have the knowledge to back up your responses. So here's how I would approach actually answering the question, give me a deal pitch with a specific example. So one industrials deal that I've been following specifically in the aerospace world is Boeing's acquisition of Spirit Aerosystems. Now this deal was announced in July of 2024, expected to close mid-year 2025. The deal is for $4.7 billion and it's all stock transaction. And this makes strategic sense for Boeing because they've had numerous regulatory and safety issues over the years, not to mention struggles with their unions. And so it makes more sense for them to vertically integrate. Spirit Aerosystems was actually a part of Boeing's business in years past, and now it makes more sense to kind of become one bigger entity. They can save more money on costs in a very high CapEx business and also ensure greater safety and better quality processes with their aerospace manufacturing operations. And so those are the basic facts of the deal. I think it makes sense for those reasons. There are some risks, of course. There could be regulatory risks given that Spirit has to sell off part of its business to Airbus, which is a direct competitor of Boeing. Also, there are still risks related to the complexity of these operations. There are a lot of procedures that have to be followed, and just because the two companies are combining doesn't automatically ensure higher levels of safety and higher levels of quality. Now, that being said, the deal still ultimately makes sense because Boeing will have more control over its supply chain. But that is the deal of Boeing and Spirit Aerosystems. Okay, so that was maybe about a minute or so, just kind of condensing all the things that I just shared with you into some of the highlights. And then, of course, I could get into the stock price changes or not, depending on how the conversation goes. I could get a little deeper into strategic rationale, why or why not. But the point is with these deal pitches, just do your research on the companies. Make sure you are looking at the press releases and really reading the details of those press releases to understand how management on both sides is thinking of the deal. So that's really the first place I usually start. And then you can also look at some regulatory filings if the companies are publicly traded. I believe it's the 8K will give you much more detail in terms of material differences, material changes to the company, which includes acquisitions. So you can look at a company's 8K in order to better understand what's going on. I hope that this deal pitch example was helpful and fruitful for you. But my name is Alex Mason here with Investment Banking Insights. I am your host and I am so grateful that you're here. And yeah, just loving life here at Cornell. If you're on the recruiting journey, I wish you the best of luck. I wish you the best of success. And let me know how you're doing. Either leave a comment on the platform that you're watching this on or listening to, or shoot me an email at investmentbankinginsights@gmail.com, and I would love to hear from you about how your recruiting journey is going. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye.